What if I told you that in the middle of Hollywood's biggest legal war, someone allegedly jumped the fence at Travis Kelce's house at 2 in the morning with claims of trying to serve Taylor Swift's subpoena papers, and at the exact same time, Blake Lively's explosive new filing backfired so badly that Justin Baldoni's team called it draconian and unprecedented. This isn't just a court battle anymore. This is a storm that could shatter reputations, careers, and even friendships forever. And the truth hiding in these documents will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Something is not adding up, and the more I think about it, the more shocking it becomes. Because the story that has been floating around is that someone was actually arrested at Travis Kelce's house in the middle of the night, supposedly trying to serve deposition papers to Taylor Swift, a subpoena that would force her into this messy legal battle. But here's the problem with that narrative, Taylor. Swift's attorney had already filed something in court days earlier, making it clear that if she was ordered to be deposed, she would be available, which means there would be absolutely no need for some stranger to jump a fence at 2 a.m. and try to serve her in such a bizarre and dangerous way. And I don't know about you, but I have never once in my life heard of a process server who shows up at somebody's private home at 2 in the morning with legal papers. Because that is not how the system works. Normally, they come in the daytime, they knock on your door. They try to catch you leaving for work. They do not risk being arrested for trespassing at a celebrity's mansion in the middle of the night. So what is really going on here is this. A case of deflection. Is this another media smokescreen to get people talking about the wrong story while the real battle is happening somewhere else? Because when I look closely, it feels like a carefully planted distraction, a way to drag Taylor and Travis into the headlines while keeping people's eyes away from the fact that Blake Lively is now facing her third attempt to sanction Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer through this brand new and untested law, California Civil Code 471, and the suspense here is not just in what the law says, but in the fact that no judge has ever ruled on it before. And that means whatever happens in this case will set a precedent that could affect countless future cases across the country, which is why every lawyer watching this is holding their breath, waiting to see if a federal judge in New York will actually touch a California statute that has never been interpreted even in California courts, because if that happens, it would be unprecedented. And yet here is Blake filing motions again and again, claiming that she is entitled to what the Wayfarer side is calling draconian relief remedies, so extreme that they could change the entire trajectory of this case forever. And when you hear the details, your jaw will drop, because she is asking for not only attorney's fees, but also treble damages and punitive damages. And all of this hinges not on whether anything actually happened the way she says, but on whether she filed her claims with malice or without malice, whether she had a reasonable basis, or whether she was motivated by something else entirely. And here is where it gets even more suspenseful, because the Wayfarer team responded by pointing to testimony that came out of depositions. Testimony from Danny Greenberg, who used to be Justin Baldoni's agent, and from others close to Blake, like her makeup artist Vivian Baker. And yet all of that testimony is sealed for now, marked confidential and hidden away from the public, which raises the terrifying possibility that behind closed doors, Blake may have said things that undercut her own claims. And if that is true, then this entire push for sanctions may be nothing more than a smokescreen, a way to poison the potential jury pool. By painting Justin as malicious before the trial even begins, and as I sift through these filings, the more I see, the more it looks like a war not about truth, but about control, about who can twist the narrative most effectively in the eyes of the court and in the court of public opinion. And here's the chilling part, because if the judge were to grant Blake what she is asking for, it would effectively mean making a factual determination that she acted without malice before a jury ever hears the case, stripping Justin of his right to present his defense and letting her win a crucial battle before the real fight has even started. And that is why this is so dangerous and so unprecedented, and why many legal experts believe the judge will not touch it, because to do so would risk violating not only the First Amendment, but also the very balance of fairness that trials are supposed to be built on. But Blake is not backing down. She has filed this motion anyway, and the suspense now hangs in the air like a storm cloud. Will the court entertain it? Or will the court push it aside for the jury to decide later, when the full trial unfolds? And that is the cliffhanger we are left with in this chapter, because nothing is certain yet, and everything is still on the table. The deeper you go into this case, the stranger and more unsettling it becomes, because what Blake Lively is attempting here is not just another motion. It is the third time she has pushed sanctions against Justin Baldoni, and each time she raises the stakes higher and higher, and this time she is leaning on a law that is so new and so untested that no one, not even in California, has ever seen how it plays out in court. And this is where the suspense thickens, because the law itself was designed to give survivors of harassment and discrimination the confidence to speak out without fear of retaliation. It was drafted to provide protections against crushing defamation lawsuits that could silence victims, and in that sense, it was born out of good intentions, but the way it is being wielded here feels different. It feels like a sword instead of a shield. And that is why Wayfarer and Justin Baldoni's attorneys are calling it draconian relief. And the tension here lies in the fact that to award these remedies, now the court would have to make a factual finding about Blake's motives, something that has not been determined yet, and something that is supposed to be the work of a jury, not a pre-trial motion. And when you stop to think about it, that creates a cliffhanger all by itself. Because if the judge grants her request, it could prejudice a future jury by sending the signal that the court has already accepted Blake's story as true. And if the judge denies it, it will mark another public loss for Blake and fuel the growing narrative that her legal filings are more about headlines than substance. And then there is the issue of where this law even applies, because Blake is not a California resident. The events she described happened on the set of It Ends With Us in New York and New Jersey, and yet she is trying to drag a California law into a federal court in New York, something legal experts call extraterritorial reach, and that opens up an entirely new dimension of suspense, because courts are generally hesitant to apply one state's laws to conduct that happened somewhere else, especially when the law is brand new and untested. And while her team insists that the remedies must be available at the earliest stage to protect survivors, Wayfarer counters that this law was never meant to apply to consolidated cases. Like this one, it was designed for situations where someone brings harassment claims and is immediately hit with a counterclaim of defamation. And that is not what happened here. Justin filed his own separate case. It was not a counterclaim, and it was only later that the court consolidated the actions into one docket. And this technical difference could end up making all the difference in the world. And then we get to the sealed depositions, the hidden testimony from Danny Greenberg and others whose names are only hinted at in the filings. And the mystery of what Blake may have told them is a cloud that hangs over everything, because Wayfarer hinted in a footnote that Blake's words to Greenberg would go directly to the issue of malice, and that means she may have admitted something or revealed something that shows she had other motives. And if that is true, it is explosive. But for now, it remains sealed out of public view, adding yet another layer of suspense, because the jury may eventually hear it, but the public cannot. And that secrecy fuels speculation, and speculation fuels the firestorm of public interest in this case, because everyone wants to know what is hidden behind those confidential stamps and why Blake is fighting so hard to keep them sealed. And as the filings continue, Wayfarer goes further by pointing out that Blake has failed to show any new facts or new law. Since her last motion, she is merely recycling old arguments in what they call a thinly veiled attempt to sway the public and poison the potential jury pool. And whether or not you agree with that framing, it is undeniable that filing repeated sanctions motions carries a PR element, especially when those filings get picked up by the press and painted as fresh blows against Justin, even when the court has not ruled in her favor. And that is the dangerous game here. The legal process being used as a stage for a narrative battle, and Justin Baldoni, caught in the middle, now has to fight not only in court but also in the court of public opinion. And it is clear from the tone of Wayfarer's filings that they see this motion not as a genuine legal attempt, but as part of a larger strategy to shift the narrative. And the chilling reality is that courts can be used this way. And that is what makes this battle so suspenseful, because at every turn, you have to ask yourself, is this about the law or is this about the story? And as more filings surface, it becomes clearer that motive is at the center of everything. Not just Blake's motive in filing her claims, but also the motive behind every motion, every press leak, every headline. And that is why legal experts say this case feels unlike any other, because it is not just a lawsuit. It is a war of perception where sealed depositions and constitutional questions collide in a drama that feels more like a scripted series than a courtroom battle, and yet this is all real and the stakes could not be higher. The moment you begin to compare what is happening in this courtroom to other infamous legal battles, you realize that Blake Lively's approach has echoes of tactics often seen in weaponized litigation, where the goal is not necessarily to win the case on its merits, but to drain the opponent of time, money, credibility, and energy through relentless filings, public pressure, and the constant looming threat of exposure. And when you look at the pattern here, 3 sanctions motions in less than a year, each one escalating the rhetoric, each one framed in the press as a devastating blow, even though the courts have yet to grant them. You see the architecture of a strategy built on intimidation and spectacle, and this is where the psychology becomes just as important as the law. Because Justin Baldoni is not only defending himself, he is being forced to live under the weight of headlines that portray him as sanctioned or reprimanded, when in reality those rulings have not come and may never come. And that kind of distortion can crush reputations long before a jury ever hears the truth. And when Wayfarer calls this a thinly veiled PR maneuver, they are pointing to that exact pressure. The kind of pressure that can scare off collaborators, investors, and friends who do not want to be associated with someone painted as toxic. And the suspense lies in whether the court will see through it or let it continue. And then there is the emotional toll. Because behind the legal briefs and citations are human beings who have to live this every day. And when you strip away the celebrity names, what you see is the machinery of litigation being used like a weapon that cuts into private lives, families, and careers, leaving scars that do not heal quickly. And for Justin Baldoni, who has built his career on a reputation of empathy and storytelling, the constant barrage threatens not only his livelihood, but also the authenticity of his message. And that is why he fights so hard to push back against these claims, not just for himself, but for the principle that courts should not be twisted into platforms for scripted narratives. And if you look at other cases where sanctions were weaponized, you see how dangerous this can be, because once a judge grants them, even in part, it becomes a headline that echoes forever, a stain that cannot be scrubbed away, even if the underlying claims are later disproven. And that is the risk here, the permanent damage of a temporary ruling, and that is why Wayfarer insists the court must resist the urge to make factual findings at this early stage, because once the bell is rung, it cannot be unrung. And as this battle unfolds, it begins to look less like a quest for justice and more like theater, staged for the public, where each filing is a script, each headline a scene, and each leaked detail a carefully placed prop. And the audience is not just the court, but the world watching on social media, reading the coverage and shaping their opinions, long before a verdict is ever delivered. And that is where the larger PR war comes into play. Because Blake Lively has always had a masterful command of image, she knows how to use the press to her advantage, whether by releasing anniversary photos from Gossip Girl, or positioning herself as the voice of empowerment. And in this case, she is leaning on that power to frame herself as the survivor under siege, and Justin as the aggressor. And whether fair or not, that framing carries enormous weight, especially when amplified by outlets hungry for celebrity drama. And this raises the chilling question of whether truth can even survive in such an environment where perception is constantly manufactured and reinforced by repetition. And when you pause to consider it, the suspense becomes almost unbearable, because it forces you to wonder not just what will happen in this case, but what it means for anyone who finds themselves accused in a world where legal filings can double as press releases, and where sealed depositions become whispered mysteries that fuel speculation without ever being tested in open court. And the more you examine it, the clearer it becomes that this is not just about Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. It is about the integrity of the system itself, and whether courts can remain sanctuaries of truth in an age where publicity often matters more than evidence. And that is why every hearing, every filing, every judge's order feels like an episode in a series where the stakes keep climbing and the tension keeps tightening, because you know that one ruling could flip the entire script. And once that happens, there is no going back. And as Justin Baldoni continues to fight this uphill battle, he becomes not just a defendant, but a symbol of resistance against a strategy that many fear could be copied by others if it proves successful. And that thought alone sends shivers down the spine, because if celebrity power can twist a law meant to protect survivors into a weapon to silence opponents, what does that mean for the rest of us? And that question lingers like a shadow over this entire saga, making every development feel like a cliffhanger in a story with no clear ending yet. As the case barrels toward its next hearing, the weight of suspense becomes unbearable, because everything now rests in the hands of a judge who must decide whether to grant Blake Lively the sanctions she demands under California Civil Code 471. And with that decision hangs not only the reputations of two celebrities, but also the credibility of an entire legal framework. And if the judge sides with Blake, it will send shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond, because it will set a precedent. That even in consolidated federal actions, new state statutes can be applied retroactively and across borders, and that would mean anyone with the resources and the reach could weaponize such laws to crush opponents with early findings of credibility, before a jury ever hears the evidence, and that thought terrifies legal scholars, who warn that it would tilt the scales of justice toward those who can afford endless motions and media manipulation. And in this sense, the ruling is bigger than Blake. Or Justin, it is about whether courts will allow the process to be twisted into a stage for public spectacle. And yet, if the judge denies Blake once again, the fallout could be equally explosive, because it will mark another defeat in her campaign, to frame herself as vindicated, and it will embolden Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer to press even harder for unsealed depositions discovery and testimony that could expose contradictions in Blake's narrative. And if those materials come to light and reveal that she exaggerated or manipulated her claims, the public backlash could be catastrophic, threatening not only her lawsuit, but also her carefully crafted image as a champion of empowerment. And this looming possibility is why so much of the case remains under seal, why every word, every footnote in the filings feels like a breadcrumb, leading to a hidden trove of secrets, and why observers cannot look away, because at any moment the curtain could be ripped back and the truth exposed in a way that no PR strategy could contain. And beyond the courtroom, the ripple effects are already being felt, because Hollywood studios, networks, and brands are watching closely. They see how quickly a lawsuit can morph into a public relations war, and they are recalibrating their risk calculations about who they partner with and who they trust. And that means the stakes for Blake and Justin are not just personal, they are professional, existential. And for Justin Baldoni, whose career has been built on telling stories of vulnerability and human resilience, the outcome of this case could determine whether he continues to be seen as a voice for authenticity or as a figure tainted by controversy. And for Blake Lively, the danger is even more acute, because she has built her brand on perfection, glamour, and influence. And if the perception takes hold that she used the courts as a weapon, that image could crack in ways that no amount of glossy photo shoots or anniversary celebrations could repair. And that is why both sides are fighting with such ferocity, because they know the judgment will not just be a ruling on paper. It will be a verdict on their identities in the eyes of the world. And as the deadline approaches, the suspense grows unbearable. Every filing, every sealed document, every whispered leak feels like the tightening of a noose, and the public waits breathlessly to see whether the judge will deliver a decision that detonates like a bomb or one that quietly diffuses the tension. But either way, the fallout will be immense, and it will not stop at the courtroom door, because Hollywood thrives on precedent and gossip, and the lessons of this case will be studied, dissected, and imitated for years to come, leaving behind a trail of speculation, suspicion, and shattered reputations in an industry that feeds on both. And as you take a step back from the details, you realize that this is not just a legal fight. It is a morality play about power, image, and truth. In the modern age, a story where every motion is a weapon, every headline a battlefield, and every sealed deposition a mystery box that could explode at any moment. And in that sense, the true suspense is not whether Blake or Justin wins it, is whether the system itself survives intact, or whether it emerges scarred, transformed, and forever vulnerable to those who know how to bend it to their will. And that is why this case feels less like litigation and more like destiny unfolding. Because whatever happens next will ripple through Hollywood, through the courts, and through the public consciousness in ways that no one can yet predict. And the cliffhanger remains hanging in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break in the end. What makes this entire saga so haunting is not just the clash between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, but the way their private battle has become a mirror for something larger, something unsettling about the way power works in our world. Because when courts become stages and filings become weapons, truth itself begins to slip through the cracks, and the danger is that once perception takes over, once headlines decide the narrative, it no longer matters what the evidence shows or what a jury might one day conclude. The public has already made up its mind, and that is why this case has gripped so many people. It is not simply about two celebrities. It is about whether justice can still function in an environment where fame, money, and influence bend the rules into unrecognizable shapes. And as we wait for the judge to deliver a ruling, the suspense grows heavier every day, because we know that whichever way the decision goes, the fallout will be permanent. If Blake Lively wins, she will have set a precedent that could echo far beyond her own life. And if she loses, she will have exposed herself to revelations that no publicist can contain. And for Justin Baldoni, the risk is equally profound. Because even if he emerges victorious, the scars of this war will linger on his reputation, his career, and his sense of self. And that is the cruelest truth of all that in a battle fought this publicly. There are no clean victories, only survivors and casualties, and the final chapter has yet to be written, leaving us all watching, waiting breath held as the storm gathers on the horizon.